Welcome to Life Stories, where we explore inspiring tales of resilience, courage, and transformation. Today, we bring you the journey of Emily, a woman betrayed by her own family, who turned heartbreak into opportunity. When her father handed over the family business to her stepbrother, Emily was left with nothing except the strength to build her own legacy. Guided by her late grandmother's wisdom and a hidden trust, she forged a path of independence, success, and impact. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's powerful tale of perseverance and redemption. Let's dive into Emily's incredible journey. The day my father betrayed me started like any other family gathering, perfectly staged and utterly hollow. I stood in the grand living room of our Chicago home, watching my stepmother, Karen, meticulously arrange a bouquet of red roses in a crystal vase. The room smelled faintly of fresh flowers and old money, and everything seemed perfect on the surface, as it always did. But beneath the facade, I could feel an uneasiness in the air, the kind that makes your stomach churn without explanation. My father, Richard, stood by his imposing mahogany desk, glancing at his watch every few moments. His demeanor, as always, was cool and commanding, the man I had spent my whole life looking up to, working tirelessly to impress. I, Emily Harrison, had dedicated the last 3 years to his company, Harrison Industries, learning every intricate detail of the business. I had sacrificed weekends, vacations, even my own health, to prove I was worthy of the promise he'd made me, the promise that one day, the company would be mine. But that promise would die today. Everyone, please have a seat, my father said, his voice firm, carrying the weight of authority it always had. My heart sank. The tone was familiar, but there was something final in it, something that whispered change was coming. I sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, my hands clasped tightly together, trying to steady the fluttering in my chest. Dylan, my stepbrother, sprawled lazily in the leather armchair across from me. His self-assured grin made my stomach twist. At 22, Dylan had never worked a day in his life, preferring to live off Karen's endless coddling and Richard's wealth. He'd cultivated an online image of an entrepreneur, posting glossy Instagram photos that implied success without substance. As you all know, Richard began, his eyes scanning the room. I've been giving a lot of thought to the future of Harrison Industries. He paused, his gaze lingering on Karen, who smiled up at him as if this was her victory, not his announcement. After careful consideration, I've decided to transfer majority ownership and control of the company to Dylan. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me stunned. My hands gripped the sofa's armrest until my knuckles turned white. What? The word escaped my lips in a whisper, barely audible over the roaring in my ears. It makes perfect sense. Karen chimed in, her voice smooth and saccharine. She placed a hand on Dylan's shoulder, her perfectly manicured nails gleaming in the light. A fresh perspective is exactly what the company needs. I looked to my father, searching his face for some kind of explanation, for reassurance that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Dad, I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. We talked about this. I've been working there for 3 years. I have an MBA. I know every client, every supplier. Emily, please. Richard cut me off, raising his hand. His expression was firm, but he couldn't meet my eyes. This decision wasn't made lightly. Dylan has some innovative ideas that align better with our vision for the future. Don't worry, Em, Dylan said, leaning forward with a smirk, his designer watch catching the afternoon light. I'll make sure to keep you on in some capacity, maybe HR or something. I stood abruptly, my legs shaking beneath me. Some capacity? My voice cracked despite my best efforts. Dad, you promised me. You said. Things change. Emily. Karen interjected smoothly, her tone laced with condescension. We have to think about what's best for the family. The family? I laughed bitterly, though it sounded more like a sob. I am your family. I'm your daughter. Richard still refused to look at me. You'll still receive your salary. Of course, he said. As though that would make it better. But Dylan will be taking over as CEO next month. Next month. It was already decided. They hadn't just considered it, they'd planned it. Finalized it. Without a single thought for me. I grabbed my purse, nearly knocking over a side table in my haste. Congratulations, Dylan. I managed. Though my voice trembled. I hope you enjoy running the company I spent 3 years helping to build. Emily. Don't be dramatic. Karen called after me as I stormed toward the door. This is exactly why we needed someone more level-headed in charge. I paused at the doorway, turning back one last time. Dad, I said, hoping, praying that he would look at me, that he would explain himself, that he would tell me this wasn't what it seemed. But he didn't. We can discuss this later. Emily, he said finally, his tone dismissive. No, I replied quietly, we won't. I walked out of that house with my head held high, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. It wasn't until I reached my car that I allowed myself to break down, gripping the steering wheel as sobs racked my body. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my best friend. How did it go? I typed back, my hands trembling. They gave everything to Dylan. Everything Dad promised me. Her response came almost instantly. I'm coming over. Don't do anything stupid before I get there. As I drove away from the only home I'd ever known, I caught a glimpse of my father standing at the window, watching me leave. For a moment, our eyes met, and I thought I saw something flicker across his face, regret. Perhaps. But before I could be sure, Karen appeared beside him, and he turned away. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I had spent my entire life working for my father's approval, believing that my loyalty and effort would be enough. But it wasn't. And now, I had nothing to lose. 3 days passed. But the sting of betrayal lingered as fresh as the moment I walked out of my father's house. I barely slept, replaying the scene over and over, wondering where I had gone wrong. What had I missed? How had I spent years working tirelessly for something that was never mine to claim? By the 3rd day, Sarah insisted I meet with our family lawyer, Mr. Franklin. You need to know your options, she said firmly, practically dragging me out of my apartment and into her car. Even if there's nothing you can do legally, you deserve to understand where you stand. Mr. Franklin's office was nestled in the heart of Manhattan. An imposing space filled with leather-bound books and the smell of polished wood. He'd been the family lawyer since I was in pigtails, and his weathered face softened as he saw me walk in. Emily, he said warmly, gesturing to a chair. What brings you here today? I sat down, clutching a tissue in my hands, and recounted the events of the family meeting. As I spoke, the pain surfaced again, and my voice cracked despite my best efforts to hold it together. I just don't understand how he could do this, I said, dabbing at my eyes. I thought the company was supposed to be divided among the children. Franklin leaned back in his chair, removing his reading glasses. Technically, as the majority shareholder, your father had the right to transfer his shares to whoever he chose, he said. But, he hesitated, as though weighing his words. But what? I pressed. Franklin stood and walked to a large filing cabinet, rifling through its contents before pulling out a thick folder. He placed it on the desk with deliberate care, his expression unreadable. There's something else you need to know. Something about your grandmother's will. I frowned. My grandmother, Margaret Harrison, had passed away 5 years ago. She'd left everything to my father, or so I'd thought. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. Franklin opened the folder, pulling out a document and sliding it across the desk to me. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Emily. And she was, let's say, forward-thinking when it came to certain possibilities. The words on the page blurred as I scanned the document. My heart racing. A trust fund. In my name. $2 million. I looked up at Franklin. My voice barely a whisper. Why didn't I know about this? The trust was conditional, he explained. You could only access the funds if you started your own successful business by the age of 30. Your grandmother believed in entrepreneurship, not entitlement. She wanted to inspire creation, not dependence. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. All this time, I'd believed my future was tied to my father's company, to his approval. But my grandmother had seen something different. She'd seen me. Does my father know about this? I asked. Franklin shook his head. Your grandmother was very specific. This information was to be shared with you only if you were disinherited from the family business. She must have had her suspicions about what might happen. I swallowed hard. A wave of emotions washing over me. Gratitude for my grandmother's foresight. Anger at my father's betrayal. And, unexpectedly, a flicker of hope. What qualifies as a successful business? I asked. My mind already racing. You need to show a profitable quarter within your first year of operation. Franklin said. And the business must be entirely your own, no family involvement. I let out a shaky laugh. Well, that won't be a problem now, will it? There's more, Franklin said, pulling out another document. Your grandmother didn't just leave you money. She left you tools, business contacts, market research, even potential opportunities she'd identified. She wanted to give you a head start, not a free ride. I blinked back tears as I skimmed the pages, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in days. My grandmother had believed in me when no one else had. Franklin hesitated before speaking again. Emily, there's one more thing. If you choose to accept this trust, you can't tell anyone about it, not your father, not Karen, not even Sarah. The money has to appear to come from your own savings and investors. Your grandmother wanted your success to be seen as entirely your own. I nodded slowly, the weight of the challenge settling on my shoulders. But alongside it came a determination I hadn't felt in years. As I left Franklin's office, clutching the folder to my chest, I felt something shift within me. My father may have taken away the life I'd worked for, but my grandmother had given me a new path. It wouldn't be easy, but I could already feel the fire in my veins. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning, research, and cautious optimism. For the first time in years, I wasn't confined by my father's expectations or weighed down by the need to prove myself to him. Instead, I was driven by my grandmother's trust in me, her belief that I could create something meaningful on my own. I sat in my modest apartment in Seattle, surrounded by piles of notebooks, business reports, and my laptop, scribbling down ideas. Sustainable packaging. It seemed so obvious now. Businesses across the country were scrambling to adopt eco-friendly practices, but few could find reliable and affordable suppliers. I'd seen it firsthand during my time at Harrison Industries. The demand was there, but the options were limited and overpriced. Okay, I muttered to myself, tapping my pen against the notebook. We need a name. Something simple but powerful. Sarah, who had become my unofficial business partner, looked up from her laptop across the room. What about Evergreen Solutions? She suggested. It's eco-friendly, and it gives that sense of growth and sustainability. I smiled. Evergreen Solutions. I repeated, testing the words on my tongue. I like it. It's perfect. From there, things moved quickly. I spent hours on video calls with manufacturers, comparing costs and quality, ensuring I could deliver on both price and reliability. Sarah helped me research potential clients, narrowing down a list of businesses that were already looking to make the switch to sustainable packaging. But the hardest part was funding. While the trust fund gave me some breathing room, I couldn't use it directly. It had to appear as though I was building this company from the ground up. I poured every cent of my savings into evergreen solutions and prepared to approach potential investors, knowing I'd need to sell them on not just the concept but my ability to execute it. Our first real breakthrough came 3 weeks after I filed the paperwork to incorporate the company. One of Sarah's contacts at a national restaurant chain agreed to meet with us. The executive, Rachel Moore, had a reputation for being tough but fair, and she was known for championing sustainability. The meeting was set for a Tuesday morning at their sleek downtown office. Sarah and I arrived early, armed with samples, a polished presentation, and no small amount of nerves. Rachel greeted us with a firm handshake and a piercing gaze that seemed to see straight through to my soul. "Let's get to it," she said, gesturing for us to sit. I walked her through our pitch, emphasizing how evergreen solutions could not only meet their sustainability goals but do so at a lower cost than their current suppliers. I showed her our prototypes, biodegradable containers and packaging materials that were as sturdy as traditional options but far more eco-friendly. Rachel examined one of the containers, turning it over in her hands. "This is impressive," she admitted. "But I've seen startups like yours before. They come in with big ideas, and 6 months later, they're out of business because they can't deliver. What makes you different?" My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I understand your concerns," I said. "That's why we've secured partnerships with 3 manufacturing facilities capable of producing at scale. We've also streamlined our supply chain to eliminate unnecessary costs and delays. I'm not just selling a product, Ms. Moore, I'm offering a complete packaging solution." Rachel's eyebrows lifted slightly, and I knew I'd caught her attention. "We can start with a trial run," I continued. "If that makes you more comfortable. Let us prove ourselves. 1 location. 1 month. If we don't exceed your expectations, you're free to walk away." Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying me for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said. "You've got yourself a trial run. Don't make me regret this." I barely managed to contain my excitement until we left the building. Once we were outside, Sarah turned to me, her face glowing with pride. "We did it," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. I laughed, a sound that felt foreign after weeks of stress. "It's just the beginning," I reminded her, though my heart felt lighter than it had in months. That night, as I sat in my tiny office, reviewing the contract Rachel had emailed over, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an Instagram post from Dylan, his usual display of wealth and arrogance. The caption read, "Family business in good hands. Excited for the future." I stared at the screen, feeling a flicker of the old anger. But instead of letting it consume me, I smiled. Let him bask in his unearned success. I was building something real. Something they couldn't take away. As I closed my laptop, I thought of my grandmother and the trust she'd placed in me. I whispered a silent thank you into the quiet of the room. This was for her, for me, and for everyone who believed success had to be earned, not handed down. And for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully, knowing that Evergreen Solutions was no longer just a dream, it was my future. The weeks following our first client agreement with the national restaurant chain were nothing short of transformative. Rachel's trial run went off without a hitch. The containers performed as promised. And within weeks, her team requested an expansion to 2 more locations. I could feel the momentum building. The kind of spark that told me Evergreen Solutions was on the verge of becoming something extraordinary. But while my company was growing, Harrison Industries, the empire my father had chosen to hand over to Dylan, was beginning to show cracks. Whispers of mismanagement floated through industry circles, and news of environmental violations linked to the company started to surface. I didn't need insider knowledge to see what was happening. Dylan, with his inflated ego and zero experience, was steering the company straight into disaster. One evening, as I worked late in our modest co-working office, My phone buzzed with a call from Dylan. I hesitated before answering. Curiosity getting the better of me. Emily, he said. His tone laced with forced casualness. How's the eco-business going? Why are you calling me? Dylan? I asked. My voice steady. Look, he began. Ignoring my question. Dad and I were talking. And we think there's an opportunity for collaboration here. Harrison Industries is considering a move into sustainable packaging. And we'd like to bring you on board as a supplier. It's a win-win. Right. We support you. And you help us clean up our reputation. I almost laughed at the audacity. You mean the company you stole from me now needs my help? I replied, leaning back in my chair. Emily, it's just business. Dylan said, as though that excused everything. You've done well for yourself. I'll give you that. But wouldn't it be easier to work with us instead of trying to compete? I appreciate the offer, I said, keeping my tone polite. But I'm not interested. I'm building something of my own. And I don't need Harrison Industries to validate it. Suit yourself, he muttered. But there was tension in his voice. Just remember, you're not the only one who can play in the sustainable space. After I hung up, I stared out the window for a long moment. Dylan's call confirmed what I'd suspected. Harrison Industries was in trouble. And now they were looking to me for salvation. A week later, the trouble became public knowledge. Business headlines across the country blared with the news. Harrison Industries faces environmental scandal. CEO Dylan Harrison under fire for mismanagement. The details were damning. Toxic waste disposal violations. Employee complaints about leadership. A plunging stock price. The company was unraveling. And fast. Sarah burst into my office. Tablet in hand. Have you seen this? She asked, shoving the article in front of me. I have. I replied, keeping my expression neutral. They're going down. Emily, she said. A mix of shock and vindication in her voice. They're calling it one of the worst corporate scandals of the decade. And Dylan will never take responsibility. I finished for her. He'll let the company burn before he admits he's the problem. As if summoned by our conversation. My phone buzzed with yet another call. This time, it was from my father. I let it ring. His persistent. I'll give him that, Sarah said, glancing at the screen. They're desperate. I replied. And desperation makes people reckless. Later that evening, my father left a voicemail. His voice, once so commanding, now sounded frail and uncertain. Emily, it's Dad. Look, I know things have been strained between us. But we need your help. The company is in trouble. And you're the only one who understands how to fix it. Please, call me back. We can make things right. I stared at the phone, my chest tight with a mix of emotions. 4 years. I had sought my father's approval, his recognition of my worth. Now, he was asking for my help, acknowledging in his own way that I had the skills he'd overlooked. But it was too late. The next morning, Sarah and I arrived at the office to a message from the national restaurant chain. They wanted to expand their contract to all their locations nationwide. Evergreen Solutions had officially arrived on the map. Congratulations, boss, Sarah said with a grin. You've earned this. As we celebrated with coffee and bagels, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Dylan. I didn't bother answering. Instead, I opened my laptop and began planning the next steps for Evergreen Solutions. Let them call. Let them plead. Harrison Industries was crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance. And I had no intention of saving it. That evening, as I walked home, I thought about my grandmother and the lesson she'd built into her trust. She had known I would face betrayal. She had known I would have to lose everything to find my own strength. And now, as I stood at the brink of real success, I could almost hear her voice whispering, "Keep going. This is just the beginning." Harrison Industries might have been my past, but Evergreen Solutions was my future. And I wasn't looking back. The announcement of Evergreen Solutions' national expansion was met with excitement in the sustainable business community, drawing attention from industry insiders and potential clients alike. Our phones buzzed constantly with inquiries, meeting requests, and congratulations. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of pride so deep it erased the bitterness of my father's betrayal. Evergreen Solutions was no longer a fledgling idea, it was a force to be reckoned with. The same couldn't be said for Harrison Industries. The news about their environmental violations had snowballed into a full-blown scandal. Stocks plummeted. Executives resigned. And Dylan, once smug and untouchable, was now the face of the company's failure. The headlines were merciless: Harrison Empire collapses under scandal. Inexperienced CEO Dylan Harrison fumbles leadership. It was only a matter of time before bankruptcy followed. Despite their public fall, my father and Dylan weren't ready to give up. One afternoon, I returned to the office to find them waiting for me in the small reception area. Dylan looked as if he hadn't slept in days, his usual air of arrogance replaced by something resembling desperation. My father, though still composed, carried a weight I hadn't seen before. "Emily," he said, standing as I entered. "We need to talk." I glanced at Sarah, who was glaring at them from behind her desk, and nodded. "Fine," I said, leading them into my office. Once the door closed, my father spoke first. "We're in a bad situation," he admitted. "You've seen the news. The company is struggling." "Struggling?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "That's putting it lightly." Dylan shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "Look, Emily, we get it. You're doing well, better than anyone expected. But Harrison Industries is still salvageable. With your help, we could turn it around." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Let me get this straight. You want me to come in and clean up your mess?" "It's not just about cleaning up," my father said quickly. "You've proven you have what it takes to lead. We're prepared to offer you majority shares. Full control of the company, whatever it takes. We need you, Emily." For a moment, I let the words hang in the air. There it was, the acknowledgement I had wanted for so long. They needed me. But it was too late. "I built this company without you," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I poured my savings, my time, and my energy into Evergreen Solutions while you handed Harrison Industries to Dylan on a silver platter. And now, after he's run it into the ground, you want me to save it? Emily, please," my father said, his tone pleading. "We're family." "Were we family when you dismissed everything I worked for?" I asked, my voice rising. "When you gave my future to Dylan without a second thought? When you left me to pick up the pieces of my life while you stood by and watched?" Dylan finally spoke, his voice cracking. "I know I messed up. Okay. I wasn't ready for this. But You weren't just unprepared, Dylan," I interrupted. "You were careless. Reckless. And now you're asking me to fix the damage you caused." "No." My father slumped in his chair, looking older than I had ever seen him. "I made a mistake. Emily," he said quietly, "I see that now. And I'm sorry." For the first time, his words carried a weight I hadn't heard before. But even as a part of me wanted to forgive him, I knew I couldn't go back. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "But Harrison Industries isn't my problem anymore. I've built something better, something sustainable. Something I'm proud of. And I'm not giving that up to save you from your own choices." They left shortly after, and I watched from my office window as they walked away, their shoulders hunched under the weight of their failures. That night, I sat at my desk, going through the latest client proposals, when a message from Mr. Franklin appeared in my inbox. Attached was a folder titled Margaret's Legacy. Inside, I found detailed plans for a foundation my grandmother had envisioned, one that would support young entrepreneurs, particularly women, in building sustainable businesses. She had left the plans incomplete. waiting for the moment I was ready to carry them forward. Tears filled my eyes as I read her notes. Her words echoed in my mind: true success isn't just about what we build for ourselves, it's about what we leave behind for others. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My grandmother had given me the tools to succeed. But she had also given me a mission. The Legacy Foundation. It was time to make it a reality. The next morning, I called Mr. Franklin. "Let's get started," I told him. For the first time, I felt like I had truly found my purpose. Evergreen Solutions was just the beginning. The Legacy Foundation would be what defined me, not as Richard Harrison's daughter, but as Margaret Harrison's granddaughter. And this, I realized, was the kind of success no one could take away from me. As the autumn breeze rustled the leaves around me, I stood at my grandmother's grave, placing fresh flowers on the marble headstone. The Legacy Foundation was officially underway, and Evergreen Solutions had exceeded every expectation. My father and I were slowly rebuilding our relationship, not as business partners, but as family. Dylan and Karen, now distant memories, were facing the consequences of their choices. Looking out at the skyline, I felt a profound sense of peace. My grandmother had taught me that success wasn't about wealth or power, it was about resilience, wisdom, and impact. I had built something of my own, something meaningful. And now I was paying it forward. Sometimes life's greatest betrayals pave the way for our greatest triumphs. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales.